Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Peter Goodwin, and I'm the president of the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. And it's my pleasure to welcome US Senator Brian Schatz, Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, distinguished colleagues, members of the press. Thanks to everyone for participating today. The University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, or better known as UMSES, is a globally eminent research and graduate institution focused on advancing scientific knowledge around the environment. We provide independent science advice to help state and national leaders manage the environment and prepare future scientists to meet the global challenges of the 21st century. We are here today to discuss groundbreaking work that began more than 5 years ago when NOAA and UMSES partnered to produce condition status reports for the 9 coral reef jurisdictions of the United States. Engaging a wide variety of stakeholders that included scientists, managers, decision makers across states and territories led to a shared vision and understanding of coral reef condition throughout the nation. So without further ado, it's my great privilege and honor to introduce Rear Admiral Timothy Gallaudet. He currently serves as the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere and is the Deputy Administrator of NOAA. Before NOAA, he served for 32 years in the US Navy, becoming the oceanographer of the Navy before completing his service in 2017. In his current position, Admiral Gallaudet leads NOAA's blue economy activities that advance marine transportation, sustainable seafood, ocean exploration and mapping, marine tourism and recreation, and coastal resilience. He is also the co-chair of the United States Coral Reef Task Force and is leading the execution of NOAA's 6 innovative science and technology strategies. He is a US Naval Academy graduate and has a PhD from Scripps Institute of Oceanography. Admiral Gallaudet, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's great to see you again. And for everybody, hello, hola, afade, aloha, and talafa. Thank you for having me, and I am just thrilled to be here to announce the issuance of this Coral Reef Status Report. I want to thank you all, and I want to thank my team at NOAA specifically, and Peter, you and your team at UMSES to participate in this event and have done so much to support our U.S. natural resources. So as the Deputy Administrator at NOAA, I'm extremely proud of my Coral Reef Conservation team, led by the fantastic Jennifer Koss, who is on the line with us now. And I've also been really proud of the incredible work with the Coral Reef Monitoring Program under NOAA, led by my great friend and colleague, Dr. Erica Toll. So like the jurisdictional reports that were mentioned and released earlier this year, this national report documents the current condition of U.S. coral reef resources, synthesizing years of robust monitoring data from every coral reef area. And this is critically important when you think about the value of the ecosystem services that coral reefs provide. Think about this. Think about the coastal protection efforts that or work that coral reefs do for our country. 97% of wave action that comes from offshore onto a coral reef is mitigated. So these protect coastal communities. We also have very robust tourism and recreational economies supported by coral reefs. And all told, when you include the coral reef contributions to fisheries, the economic impacts of coral reefs in the United States are around $3.4 billion annually. So this is really of great importance for our nation. This has also been a key focus area of mine as the co-chair of the U.S. Coral Reef Task Force, along with the Department of Interior. And the Coral Reef Task Force is working closely with our newest member, FEMA, to explore the role of corals as natural infrastructure. This is critical, again, to reducing the loss of life and protecting property and livelihoods when large storms hit our U.S., like has been done in a record-setting way this year on the Gulf Coast. So building on this cross-governmental collaboration, I'm pleased to share with you that NOAA will soon release a stony coral tissue loss disease strategy. And this strategy is addressing the disease that's affecting most of the Caribbean and all of Florida right now in a really harmful way. The strategy provides a vision for continuing our ongoing research, our response to the disease, and engagement with partners to tackle it and prevent the spread of the disease to the Pacific, which I know to be important, having dove with coral reef scientists in my agency, both in Palau and in Hawaii. The report also documents the application of our S&T strategies we've recently released that include areas like using autonomous systems, artificial intelligence, and bioinformatics or omics to get at the important research and science needs to improve the health of our reef systems. Now, in addition to our strategy, NOAA's expanded our innovative public-private partnerships to tackle this challenge, and that includes examples like our Mission Iconic Reefs in Florida and the Florida Keys, as also the 100 Yards of Hope effort by Force Blue. It's a veterans group that's committed to restoring coral reefs and really advancing the livelihoods of those affected by post-traumatic stress disorder. So, lastly, I should point out that our restoration and recovery of coral reef ecosystems is a bipartisan priority. So it is my privilege to introduce the Honorable Brian Schatz, Senator of Hawaii. He is a long-term NOAA partner and a tireless champion for healthy coral reefs. And as Hawaii's senior senator, Senator Schatz serves on 4 Senate committees, essential for the future of Hawaii and our coral reefs. These are the Appropriations, Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, Commerce, Science, and Transportation, and Indian Affairs committees. So along with Florida's Senator Marco Rubio, Senator Schatz introduced bipartisan legislation, the Restoring Resilient Reef Acts, aimed at bringing more partners into the preservation of our reef systems. And he'll talk a little bit about that now. So please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to our Senator, Brian Schatz.
Well, thank you, Admiral Gallaudet. I really appreciate your great work at NOAA and at the Department of Commerce. I'm here because our corals are in a fragile state. Climate change and ocean acidification have put corals on the brink of extinction. Time is running out, and we have a narrow window of opportunity to save them. For anyone who grows up on an island or near the ocean, protecting our oceans and coral reefs is personal. When it comes to creating healthier oceans, Hawaii is leading the way. That's because we have a knowledge base and an experience base that is both traditional and current, that is cultural and scientific, and that can help us and the world to do something. In Hawaii, there are many organizations working hard to improve our oceans and reefs. Malama Mauna Lua, Maui Cultural Lands, the Nature Conservancy, Pono Pacific and Kupu, Waterkeeper Alliance, Hawaii Conservation Alliance, Conservation Council, Kahea, Surfrider Foundation, Conservation International, Coral Reef Alliance, Hawaii Green Growth, Y, 808 Cleanups, Kewalo Marine Laboratory, HIMB, UHC Grant, SOEST, UH Manoa, DLNR, DAR. And I wanted to name all of them because it's so important to recognize that coral reef preservation doesn't happen in Washington, D.C. It can be enabled by some of our actions and some of our programs, but the real work happens at the local level. Nationally, NOAA is taking significant steps to protect the health of the oceans. The new status report that we're announcing today will help us to better understand what's at stake and how we can turn this situation around. To support all of our efforts to save the oceans, I've introduced the Restoring Resilient Reefs Act with Marco Rubio. This bipartisan bill grows the NOAA program, and it will give local governments and communities the federal resources to help to save corals in Hawaii and across the country. This includes a new block grant program, grant preferences to local coral reef management groups, and funding for coral reef disasters and for coral reef research. This bill will help us to protect the corals we have and restore coral reefs that we've lost. We are working with colleagues in the House to agree on details so that we can get this bill enacted into law. And so I want to thank everybody who's doing this great work and your dedication to preserving the oceans and our coral reefs.
Thank you, Senator Schatz. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Heath Kelsey. He is Director of the Integration and Application Network at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. He has developed more than 20 socio-environmental health assessments for coastal and riverine ecosystems worldwide. His specialties include science communication, environmental and public health assessment, ecosystem health indicators, and stakeholder engagement. Dr. Kelsey earned his undergraduate degree at St. Mary's College of Maryland and his master's and doctoral degrees at the University of South Carolina. Take it away, Dr. Kelsey.
Thank you, Caroline. Thanks for that introduction. My job here today is to present the results of the U.S. Coral Reef Condition Status Report. And the highlight is that U.S. coral reefs in the Pacific and the Atlantic are in fair condition, but they're in declining condition and are continued to be vulnerable. This U.S. coral reef status report is the result of 5 years of effort with a lot of people involved. Over 150 people were involved in preparing the jurisdictional coral reef status reports in each of the 10 NOAA jurisdictions. And this U.S. coral reef condition status report is a synthesis of those efforts, a summation of those efforts. Both the individual status reports and the U.S. coral reef status reports are available at the two websites listed here, the NOAA website and the website for the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. If you look at the results a little bit more closely, both the Pacific Basin and the Atlantic Basin are in the fair range. The fair range goes from 70% to 79%. And as you can see, though, that the Atlantic Basin score is at the low end of the fair range. One more point would put it in the impaired range. We look at indicators for corals and algae, for fish, human connections, and climate. Again, both are in the fair condition, but are vulnerable to further decline. And the Atlantic Basin is kind of on the cusp of the impaired status. The indicators that we have are measured against some kind of desired condition, a reference condition, an historical baseline, some condition that we would like to achieve. And so on the very good scale, we would have almost all or all of those indicators would meet those reference conditions. And then all the way on the other end of the spectrum, in the critical condition, very few or none of those indicators would meet those reference values, and human connections would be severely lacking. If you look at this a little bit more graphically, this is the trajectory that we're on. On the left side, we have very good condition reefs. You can see a lot of structure, a lot of diverse corals, diverse wildlife and things, complexity. As you move to the right, we have a little bit less complexity, a little bit less structure. Some of the coral has died. We see bleached coral and diseased coral. We see fewer fish and less healthy fish populations. And then all the way to the right, we see a coral reef in critical condition, which has very little structure left. The corals have died and turned to rubble, and algae has taken over, and we see very few fish. The yellow arrow pointing up is approximately where we are on that spectrum. We are moving, unfortunately, in the wrong direction. We're moving to the right in this diagram. So there are a lot of reasons why coral reefs are stressed and we're moving in this direction. Corals are impacted by pollution from the land surface, fishing pressure, disease, direct impact from human interactions with the reef. But most importantly, and immediately, global warming or global climate change and warming sea surface temperatures are the single biggest threat to coral reefs worldwide, and the U.S. jurisdictions are no exception. From 2014 to 2017, we had a prolonged global ocean heat wave, which caused a lot of coral mortality globally. And again, the U.S. coral reefs were not immune from that. That sounds like a really gloomy picture, but it doesn't. We should take a little bit of hope from a couple of things. The first thing to point out is that arrow at the top of this diagram is double-ended. We don't have to continue going down the path to the right side of this diagram. We do have it in our power to move things to the left. It won't be easy, won't be quick, but we do have that capability if we choose to do that. The other thing to keep in mind that should give us a little bit of hope too is that in all of the jurisdictions, even where coral reef condition overall was not where we wanted to be, there are some areas, some regions, some little jewels within there that are in very good condition. So we do have those areas still remaining in all of those places. This is also borne out in the map of the results. Not everything was in fair or impaired conditions. We did have a few areas that are in good condition. American Samoa, Flower Garden Banks in the Gulf of Mexico, and the Pacific Remote Islands are all in a good condition. The interesting thing to note about that is that all of those reefs are fairly remote from people. Not a lot of population centers nearby, and not a lot of direct human interaction with the reef. So with that, I would like to turn this over to Jennifer Kaz. Jennifer is the director of NOAA's Coral Reef Conservation Program. She has degrees in oceanography and biology from the University of Michigan and did her graduate work in marine policy at the University of Delaware. Jennifer's work focuses on coastal and marine habitat restoration and conservation issues, working with EPA's Chesapeake Bay Program Office, NOAA's Restoration Center, the Program Coordination Office of the NOAA Administrator, and for the last 7 years, NOAA's Coral Reef Conservation Program. She's a graduate of the prestigious NOAA Leadership Competencies Development Program and has legislative experience, having worked for 2 years with Senator Daniel Inouye's office. So with that, I also need to mention that Jen has been an excellent partner to work with on this project over the last 5 years. So I'll turn it over to you, Jen.
Thank you, Heath. And thank you very much for such a great explanation of the status reports. And another thank you, a special thank you to Senator Schatz for taking the time out of his very busy day and schedule to speak with us about the importance of coral reefs to Hawaii and our other coral reef areas. Growing up in Hawaii, he's uniquely qualified to know what it is to live on an island and the importance of natural infrastructure like coral reefs to not only the tourism and fishing economies of Hawaii, but to protecting vulnerable coastal areas, livelihoods, and the built infrastructure of these coastlines. As a U.S. Senator, he's also in the position to make a difference, not just for Hawaii's coral reefs, but the nation's coral reefs. So thank you, Senator Schatz and Senator Rubio, for the Restoring Resilient Reefs Act of 2019. We look forward to seeing where it's going to go. So now back to the status reports. A special thank you also to the team at UMCES for being such incredible partners and professionals in the development and creation of these first of their kind documents. Without your expertise, we've never been able to pull these off. Your expertise in taking highly technical data and distilling it down to create visually appealing, data-rich publications, not to mention the amazing graphic design work, was all evidenced in each of these 10 reports. And from the bottom of my heart and the NOAA team, we can't thank you enough. To my own team at NOAA, huge kudos and a heartfelt thank you for the incredible amount of work you all undertook to get the National Coral Reef Monitoring Program, or NCREM, to where it is today, and for your dedication in producing these reports. In particular, I'd like to call out the contributions of Justine Kimball, who started the ball rolling with the Pacific Coral Reef status reports, and then Erica Tull for coming in as our champion, our new NCREM coordinator, and seamlessly picking up where Justine left off, bringing home the Atlantic and Caribbean status reports to the national roll-up. There's a lot of things that keep me up at night, and working with Erica is not one of them. I can totally rely on her, and she did a great job. So thank you very much, Erica. Carolyn, could you put the slide up for me, please? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the NOAA Coral Reef Conservation Program. I'm very happy to announce we're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. We bring together expertise from across NOAA for a multidisciplinary approach to studying these complex ecosystems to inform more effective management. We work very closely with NOAA scientists across the entire agency, and we use a ridge to reef strategy for coral conservation. That is to say that we address insults coming from off the land, all the way down to getting into the water, working with corals, understanding what the microbial community has to say about the overall health and condition of our coral reefs. So very holistic and really bridging multiple parts of NOAA's expertise to bring about sound conservation. Collaboration is also critical to coral reef conservation. We partner with our state and territorial government counterparts, academic institutions, non-governmental organizations, community groups, all to take targeted approaches to local issues that impact coral reef ecosystems, We monitor our nation's reefs. We provide bleaching forecasts and warnings. We build capacity at the local level for communities to adopt and manage their own coral reefs. So this is truly all hands on deck effort, and certainly one that we cannot do alone. As you can see from the map on this screen, U.S. coral reefs span an immense geography. We work as far east as the U.S. Virgin Islands. I think Point Udall is the easternmost point in the U.S., all the way to what I like to call the coral reefs of tomorrow. Those in Guam and the Marianas, they're over the date line, and usually most of my day it's tomorrow there, so I can call and ask for sports scores. And all of the tropical areas in between. So not only is it a huge geography to cover, but it's a huge diversity of different reef types and formations. So we've got the classic conditions of Caribbean reefs all the way out to the more eastern tropical Pacific reefs and central and western as well. So it's an immense amount of science that it takes to understand the differences between all these reefs, how to monitor them and how to manage them. Conducting monitoring across this enormous area is a huge lift and a massive collaboration effort accomplished with many of our state and territorial partners, not to mention our academic institutions, just to gather that data. Central to the success and statistical power of NCREMP was coming to agreement on these consistent set of indicators that we would report on using the same methodology in each of our areas, and both populated and remote, the uninhabited islands like those in the Pacific and Flower Garden banks off the coast of Texas. The status reports required an incredible amount of work to agree on which of our indicators to report on and what defensible baselines are for these indicators, given the lack of historical available data for many coral reef areas. The reports have gone out for extensive review and have been vetted by experts from across the nation and even globally. I'd like to conclude by saying the audience for these condition status reports is the general public and decision makers like governors and Congress. We're providing a snapshot in time that is our best understanding of condition of what these reefs is. We view these reports as a conversation starter on what action we can take to change the trajectory of decline to one of hope for corals. Future versions of these reports will likely include trends so that we can show changes over time. And these are truly unique reports nationally and globally, in that they do contain all that information about human dimensions. No one else approaches reporting out on the condition of their reefs quite this way. And I also want to conclude in saying that NOAA and its partners are doing everything we can to reduce stressors and through active interventions and restoration efforts to improve the condition of coral reefs so that we have them for now and for future generations. Carolyn, if you want to shut the slide off, I will introduce the wonderful Richard Beavers. Thank you. Richard Beavers is the founder and CEO of the Ocean Agency, a unique nonprofit accelerating ocean conservation action through creativity, technology, and powerful partnerships. That's been working with NOAA for the last 8 years. I've had the chance to work with him frequently on a number of different things, as had Mark Aitken, who's on the call, who is also featured in Chasing Corals. Richard's imagery, projects, and public speaking have made him a leading voice in the fight to save coral reefs, and his achievements include taking Google Street View underwater. It's really cool if you haven't seen it yet. Pioneering virtual reality ocean education, the XL Catlin Sea View Survey, a global survey of coral reefs, the Netflix original documentary Chasing Coral, and raising over $100 million for coral reef science and conservation. Anytime you want to come work for us, Richard, we'll tap into you from that money as well. We've asked Richard to share his unique story and imagery with you to help bring to life the importance of their report.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And I'll just share my screen. And hopefully you can see my screen there.
Yes.
So I want to say a big thank you for inviting me to be part of the launch of this report. I know how much work goes into these reports, and it's phenomenal. The Ocean Agency, as Jennifer mentioned, we launched 10 years ago by taking Street View underwater And a lot of the focus of our work has been on coral reefs over the last 10 years. Now, that partnership with Google initially really did sort of transform the ability of people to visit coral reefs. More people went virtual diving on the first day of launching Google Street View underwater than have ever been diving in history. And that's really the power of partnerships. And we've been working closely with NOAA on revealing these underwater environments ever since. Now, the initial project soon turned into a global survey of coral reefs, taking over 1 million images of reefs all around the world. And a lot of our focus has been on American territory reefs. And it's turned into a big education program, which is now available to 90 million kids. And it was really as if sort of virtual reality was made for the oceans and engaging kids in these environments. And we've traveled all around the world and to a lot of different American territories. We spent a lot of time in American Samoa doing surveying there with some of the largest corals in the world. Then we went off to Palmyra, one of the jewels in the world's coral reefs. It's just an incredible, very, very remote and protected location. And then closer home, St. Croix in the US Virgin Isles, where there were some of the most amazing elkhorn corals, which used to be abundant throughout Florida. And we spent a lot of time revealing the different locations in the Florida Keys. But really it was in the end of 2014, when Mark Aiken on the call notified me that there was going to be a big heat wave coming through, and we found ourselves with the right cameras and the right equipment to be able to reveal that. And we became like these sort of underwater storm chasers, chasing this heat wave as it tracked around the planet. First of all, we took imagery in American Samoa, and then tracked it as it tracked around the world. And this image, going back to this image, shows the transformation from a live reef to a bleach reef and then a dead reef in a very short period of time. Fortunately, in American Samoa, most of the reefs bounced back and weren't impacted in a major way from the bleaching event. But this particular reef was particularly exposed and suffered heavy loss of coral reef. But it's not just the heating event underwater that's the impact from climate change. It's also the storm events. And in St. Croix was hit by a major hurricane in 2016. And we went back to visit that to see the aftermath underwater. And that's sort of the devastation that you see. Some of these elkhorn corals that have been around for such a long time, devastated by the hurricane activity. Now, fortunately, there's huge difference in vulnerabilities of reefs. Some reefs are far less vulnerable than others. And we launched a project called 50 Reefs, really to identify almost the perfect portfolio of reefs where we should be investing our sort of protection efforts and bolstering protection efforts. And that's not the only sort of good news, that we can target protection efforts. There's also sort of great activity going on in places like Hawaii. This is the Hawaiian Institute of Marine Biology, really studying heat-resistant corals and whether or not we can introduce heat-resistant corals in critical locations. And there's also been huge progress being made in restoration. This was a site that we visited before restoration and then after the restoration. And this reef was recovered in just 3 years, and the fish populations were back almost 100% coral cover. And with the right investment in the right locations, we can make a big impact. Now, one question we often get asked is, what can I do? And this is a question from the general public. And we sort of normally come back with three things. One is getting informed. Chasing Coral, directed by Jeff Walowski, does an amazing job of telling the story of what's happening to coral reefs. But then it's also about getting involved and supporting marine protection. We've recently launched a campaign with Adobe and UN Environment called the Oceanleague.org, where people can show their support for marine protection in a really positive way. And it's critical that it isn't just the usual sort of environmental activists that's showing support for action, but it is the general public. And then finally, it's about climate action. And there's so many things that people can be doing to have a major impact for coral reefs, because coral reefs really are on the front line of climate, and they need to be like the poster child of climate action. And with that, I will hand back to the rest of the panel to include their thoughts on what should be done or how the public can get involved.
Thanks, Richard. This is Heath Kelsey. I'll take a shot at this too. I think, as you mentioned, first getting informed and getting educated about what's happening with coral reefs is maybe one of the most important things people can do. And we hope that, these U.S. coral reef condition status reports are a good step to doing that, along with Chasing Coral and other educational kind of venues. I think there are also some things that people can do to support coral reefs and make them perhaps a little bit more resilient to some of the other stressors that are occurring. So, things like reducing pollution from the land surface and recycling and trash and committing to using reefs appropriately and responsibly. Not putting your anchor down on corals, directly on corals and things like that. Don't run your boat up on the reef and things like that. Those are all things that people can do to just help reefs become a little bit more resilient to the stresses of climate change.
Would any of our other speakers like to offer some actions that everyone can take?
I think that Richard and Heath covered it pretty well. If you want to open up for other questions and reporters, this would be a good time.
Okay, great. Yep. So that concludes the speaking parts of our press event today. And we'd like now to open it up for all questions. But first, we're going to have the reporters who are on the line ask questions. You can unmute yourself and just ask verbally, or you can put it into the chat box now.
And I'd just like to add that all the images that were in the presentation are available for media use.
Yeah, we have our first question from Greg Allen from NPR. Can you discuss why Florida reefs are in the worst shape of all those surveyed? Jen or Dr. Kelsey, potentially?
I can start very briefly, but I'll turn it over quickly to Jennifer. The short answer is that there are a lot of people in Florida. The population of Florida that are next to and adjacent to the coral reefs is immense, and that is going to have an impact on coral reefs. So it wasn't really a surprise from our status reports. But I'll turn it over to you, Jen. You have a little bit more nuanced look at this.
So I think that's a perfect answer. If you look at the Florida reef track as a continuum, you see that the conditions in the Tortugas are actually not so bad. And as you work your way up through the Keys and then get up into Southeast Florida, it's where you see more impairment of those reefs. And it shouldn't be surprising. There's an immense population of people that live in close proximity to those reefs. And I think it's only been within the last few years that people have come off of septic use in the Keys themselves and now are on sewer. So Florida's making a lot of strides to improve water quality, knowing that a lot of the resources are becoming impaired by the use and the overlove, if you will, of those resources. So it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, but I'll also say there's a lot of great management efforts going on in Florida right now, and efforts like Mission Iconic Reefs and 100 Yards of Hope, and a lot of research on the disease situation itself in order to improve those coral reefs.
other questions? I know we have Mr. Hurley from Honolulu Star Advertiser. If any other media questions, those working on stories. From Brian Walker, we have a question. There has been a very impactful coral disease event following several years of very warm, stressful conditions. That sounds like a comment.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly another explanation for why Florida's reefs are in rough shape. I will add that the data that were used to produce this particular report have not taken into account the another assessment of coral reefs that would have shown more decline, unfortunately, because of stony coral tissue loss disease. So the next version we put out of this may show a downward decline for reefs in Florida because of the disease.
This is Bobby Colvin with the AP. I'm wondering, what are some of the things working against you right now in trying to save these coral reefs? I mean, what help do you need from Washington, for example, and elected officials in Florida in particular?
I'm happy to take a crack at that, unless Richard or Heath, you want to jump in?
Well, I think it's the scale of the issue. This is a global ecosystem that is the first sort of ecosystem that's really at threat of us losing a planetary scale ecosystem. So it's that scale that's the big issue, and it's happening very, very quickly across a vast area. So we need to both have climate action, and we need to have marine protection, and we need to do the science to be able to really work out how to address this issue. So it's that scale that's the biggest challenge of all.
And I'll add that traditional coral reef conservation used to be try to manage your local stressors in the hopes that coral reefs would have enough innate resilience in themselves to sort of stave off the effects of ocean acidification and warming. Unfortunately, the conservation strategies never don't do this, it's do this and this, and this. And so now just more resources are needed to really do some direct interventions and broader ecosystem level scale restoration to get some structure and ecosystem function back into those reefs and get them to the point where they're viable and reproducing themselves.
And excuse me for following up with this question, but is there the political climate or environment that you need to get help?
I really think so, as witnessed by the bipartisan bill drafted by Senator Rubio and Schatz. And then there's a parallel bill on the House side as well that has good bipartisan support. I think anybody that loves coral reefs, it's not a political issue.
I want to jump in and say we have a question from Tim Hurley at the Honolulu Star Advertiser. Was there anything especially surprising in your findings?
I can have a quick go at that. I think in general, when we look back at the results, I don't think they were surprising. The areas that were more remote tended to do fairly well, including Flower Gardens banks in the Gulf of Mexico. It's a little bit farther offshore. It's a little bit deeper, a little bit harder to get to, as is the case with some of the reefs in the Pacific that turned out fairly well. So overall, I think conditions were kind of what we expected. But I think one of the really interesting things that came out in some of the analyses that we looked at was the proximity of people to reefs and relationship with top predators. I think that was really surprising to me. If you put populations, if you have a coral reef with people that are nearby, like population centers that are near the reefs, the top predators really just go away. And that was really surprising to me. It's probably not surprising to the fish ecologists and coral reef ecologists that have been working on this, but it was really striking. And it doesn't take very many people within a populated area to see that effect.
I'll add on to what Heath has said, and not so surprising, but just it's an affirmation that we know what the global stressors are as evidenced by the condition of those really remote areas in the Pacific where there's literally no human action happening. Even those reefs aren't pristine because they're dealing with the impacts of climate change.
We have a follow-up question from Greg Allen of NPR. Does the coral reef disease pose an existential threat to some reef tracts?
Oh, that's a loaded question. It has gone pretty much the entire length of Florida's reef tract. It hasn't quite edged its way into the Tortugas yet that we know of, but unfortunately it's spread into the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and I think now 12 or 13 Caribbean nations. So we are doing our utmost to understand what the disease is, how it's moving, trying out many different intervention strategies to prevent the disease from progressing. But yeah, it is a big threat, and we're very concerned about it potentially moving into the Pacific, and that's why NOAA has written its own stony coral tissue loss disease strategy that is NOAA's particular bailiwick in what we can do, along with EPA and Coast Guard and other entities, to make sure it's not a ballast water problem. But it is a big problem, and I wouldn't sugarcoat it.
Caroline, if you want to open it up to any other questions from our friends at NOAA or partners.
All right, so we have a couple minutes that we can answer any questions that folks have beyond the media. So Mark Aiken has posted in the chat. There's a comment: a decisive work to address climate change in the U.S. and globally is the biggest concern, as it's damaging coral reefs everywhere. And he's, talking about restoration work that needs to be only to plant more corals, but plant corals that are more resistant to high temperatures. And however, restoration alone won't be enough without addressing climate change at the same time. So it's more of a comment. Are there questions? Other questions?
Question for Mark. I mean, I would agree that as we approach restoration, as we approach any one of your management actions, that needs to be with an eye towards resilience-based management. So everything we do is with knowledge that the ocean will continue to affect corals on the ocean warming and oceanic acidification front. So that's what our NOAA strategy is, and Mark knows because he helped write it.
Dr. Goodwin, I'm going to turn it back over to you for some closing comments, please.
Great. Well, thanks, Mike. And I would just like to thank everyone for participating this afternoon, particularly Senator Schatz for both your leadership, but also building a bipartisan strategy for the long term. I think that was very inspiring. And the presence and the articulateness of Admiral Gallaudet, really a great job. Just your presence here today shows how important NOAA is taking this issue around one of the most vulnerable ecosystems on the planet. Also, Jen Cost, Mark Eakin, the rest of your NOAA team, as always, great science, great work, and really well presented. And I'd also like to acknowledge the members of the press for your assistance in helping raise public awareness around these great issues. Richard Beaver, it's great to see your work and the incredible impact you've had globally. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for their participation. Let's keep hope alive and keep pushing for these vulnerable ecosystems. And of course, I'd just like to thank all of my colleagues across UMSEAs that help contribute to the program as well.